Saturday, the 6th of September 1986, was a day that would have a lasting impact on me and change my view on visual effects and model making forever. The Trial of a Time Lord Episode 1 opened with a spectacular sequence that combined the exquisite model making abilities of Mike Kelt and his team with the mesmerising and dizzying camera work of Peter Tyler, both of which were underpinned by Dominic Glynn's haunting score that, when all set together, heralded the ominous tone of what was to come in this brand new series. Somehow what they achieved through their collective disciplines resonated with me on such a level that it left an indelible mark on the very fibre of my being. Those scant few seconds would live with me for the next 40 years, and it taught me that with keen visuals and the right soundtrack, one could tap directly into the viewer's emotional response centre. At the time of its creation back in 1986, this sequence was reportedly the longest and the most complex motion control shot that up to that point the world had ever seen. And even by today's standards, it can still hold its own against the very best effects work that Hollywood cinema has to offer. So today I'm going to talk to you about what is, in my humble opinion, one of the greatest visual effects sequences that has ever been committed to celluloid. In February 1985, Doctor Who was cancelled and all of the scripts for the following season were scrapped. Michael Gray, the then controller of BBC One, stated that the declining viewing figures, the farcical storylines, and the rampant levels of violence contained within an early evening family show was not a good look for the BBC, and thus he felt that the programme's budget could be better spent elsewhere. He made no bones about what he thought of the programme. He did not like it. He did not like it one bit.
No, when I was controller of BBC One, I cancelled the show.
This isn't a pantomime.
Oh, yes, he did.
So why did you cancel the show?
I thought it was rubbish. I thought it was pathetic. I mean, I'd seen Star Wars, and I'd seen Close Encounters and E.T., and then I had to watch these cardboard things probably clonking across the floor, trying to scare kids. You know, you just sit and laugh at it. I actually hate sci-fi to begin with, so I'm not a sci-fi fan. But it seemed to me that Doctor Who was caught in a time warp.
Yes.
Really,
okay.
so to speak.
I think that's the nature of the show, isn't it?
But according to the programme's star, Colin Baker, it went far deeper than just this. It was personal, as the pair had a shared history and neither liked the other. However, despite this, the programme was eventually given a reprieve, with one final chance to redeem itself. In response, the creative team behind Doctor Who rolled with this fact and came up with the notion that over the course of the 14 episodes allotted to this season, the Doctor would find himself placed on trial by his peers, the Time Lords, just as the programme itself was, to all intents and purposes, on trial with the BBC executives. And thus, the rather on-the-nose title of The Trial of a Time Lord was born. Very much akin to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, The Trial of a Time Lord would be broken down into what is essentially 4 chapters, with actions from the Doctor's past, present, and his future all playing out as part of the evidence for both the prosecution and the defence before the final verdict was to be wrapped up in the final 2 episodes. But apparently there was something missing from the original season pitch, and indeed the early rehearsal drafts of the scripts. Mike Kelt, the visual effects designer allotted to the first 4 episodes, recalled how the show's producer, John Nathan Turner, wanted Doctor Who to burst back onto our screens with an attention-grabbing hook that had screamed that they were back, bigger, better and bolder than ever before. To this end, John himself suggested that they should echo the award-winning opening to the 1977 Star Wars movie, with an awe-inspiring crawl towards and around the Time Lord's trial ship as it captures and draws the TARDIS in, thus cementing to the audience where precisely this season's core narrative was set, and so this element was duly added to Mike Kelt's storyboards. However, there has been one mystery that has surrounded this sequence ever since this effect shot was made, and that was that there was supposedly a tracking shot pushing through a graveyard of derelict spacecraft before revealing the trial ship in the distance. Apparently though, this aspect was cut due to budgetary restraints. Now, Mike Kelt has said that this was never the case, yet as early as December 1986, in issue 100 of Starburst magazine, feature writer Peter Newell makes a direct reference to it, and it's been repeated through a variety of media as well as within fan circles for the last 4 decades now. So what's the deal here? Well, I have a gut feeling that it may be down to a bit of a misunderstanding, or at the very least, the use of wrong terminology. Scouring through numerous pages of BBC documentation from the time of the production, I found this first transmission form dated the 10th of June 1986, where it describes the opening of the episode in readiness for its broadcast. It states, quote, "Usual Doctor Who opening titles, first 3 seconds deliberately loud, duration 35 seconds. Subtitle, The Trial of a Time Lord at 24 seconds. By Robert Holmes at 27 seconds, Part 1 at 31 seconds. And this is the interesting bit. Mixed to a model shot of skeletal remains of a space freighter. Shot ends with TARDIS spiralling downwards, then a whiteout." To me, that last paragraph could easily explain the birth of that rumour. Someone at the BBC simply glanced at Robert Holmes' script, then slightly mangled his scene description for this form. So, if that paperwork was then seen by a reporter, a fan, or whoever, then that could explain where this rumour came from in a sort of Chinese whispers fashion, as it's the only official documentation that even remotely matches this mysterious lost sequence. To be honest though, if this is actually the case, in that the scene never really was a thing, then I'm slightly disappointed because the idea did seem pretty appealing really. The finished sequence came in at just under a minute's worth of footage and cost a total of £8,000 to make. That's just shy of £25,000 in today's money. An absolute steal really, despite Colin Baker's myopic view that the money could have been better spent elsewhere. Thinking about it now, what they managed to achieve back then in 1986 on such a minuscule budget is nothing short of astonishing, a minor miracle even, as the impact that it would go on to have was far-reaching, setting a whole new standard for television visual effects for many, many years to come. BBC visual effects designer Mike Kelt, who in Doctor Who circles is widely known for redesigning the TARDIS console prop for the 5 Doctors some 3 years earlier in 1983, was now brought back and assigned to the first 4 episodes of this new season, and it was his job to design and oversee the build of the Trial Ship miniature, as well as to storyboard the grand opening sequence. What he came up with was a circular design adorned with Gothic spires, flying buttresses, and an internal walled trench that reflected the idea that the Time Lords were an ancient and powerful civilization. The plan then moving forward was to sculpt the station as just a single pie-shaped segment, take a mould of that, and then cast out 6 copies in fiberglass to complete the full sweep of the hull. One trick that Mike was very keen to add was to have a vast array of vertical antennas and horizontal pipes that would be carefully positioned around the ship's hull along the camera's path, not just to give points of interest as we move through the structure, but also to promote the effect of parallaxing between these parts, the hull of the ship itself, and the star-filled cyclorama that was to surround the miniature. The final aspect of this project that Mike gave careful consideration to was of course the colour scheme of the Trial Ship itself. In past magazine articles it has been suggested that Mike took his inspiration from the colourful science fiction artwork of Chris Foss, but this was simply not the case. For Mike, his choice of colours found themselves grounded not in somebody else's artwork, but in colour theory, in particular the triadic base of complementary colours. Given that the TARDIS was to feature within this sequence, this gave Mike his starting point of blue. Swing 120 degrees around the wheel and you find yourself on red. That became the station's main tone. Swing a further 120 degrees and we find ourselves on yellow, our final colour. Now that the groundwork had been laid out, budgets had been set and the camera equipment was booked, it was now time to start making all this a reality. Work began on the pie-shaped Pattermaster with visual effects technician Melvin Friend first layering up and gluing together various thicknesses of extruded insulation foam board. From there, he carefully carved out the required contoured shapes and sections that, when assembled, would go on to form the basic topography of the station. To add visual detail that would help to convey a sense of massive scale, Melvin was ably assisted by new kid on the block Mike Tucker, and between the pair of them they began to adorn the segment with a selection of plastic parts to break up the smooth surface area. Most notably, architectural components such as tubes, domes, elbow joints were all sourced from EMA model supplies and were placed down in the trench, while an assortment of greeblies, kit-bashed from a variety of commercially available model kits, were added around the docking bay and along the inner walls. Once this was completed, the segment was handed over to Mike Ellis, who then struck a mould from it in silicone rubber and cast out 6 duplicate copies in fiberglass. Now that the basic shape of the station had come together, it was time to start layering on yet more detail onto it. A spire constructed from various diameters of PVC tubing adorned with gantries and sections taken from an oil rig model kit was placed at the centre of the miniature and held in place with 6 buttresses fashioned from plywood clad in plastic strips and assorted greeblies. Within the trench, further kit parts and ducting were added to create yet more areas of interest, which made the structure look busy and complicated, rather like a power station. Surrounding the perimeter of the model on the ramparts, 24 individual gun turrets were fashioned from a collection of robot models and military kits and a variety of other found objects, and all were given multiple protruding barrels to entrench the idea that this station was heavily armoured. The final step in this massive undertaking was to paint and weather the space station. Having elected to use red oxide primer as the main base colour, Peter Ercast then masked up several key areas and picked these out in an off-yellow that would serve to create a contrasting highlight tone and draw the eye in. It was probably this element that made people think of the artist Chris Foss's work, as was mentioned earlier on. Similarly, the large identification numbers that adorned each docking bay were also painted in a complementary colour, this time a stark white, while the 24 outer perimeter gun turrets were sprayed in both silver and gunmetal grey, to help them stand out against the blackness of space. Lastly, the entire trial ship was weathered down with powders and paint, with some sections given blast marks and heavy streaking to help sell the idea that this ship was old, used and had seen service over the centuries. Now that the model was completed, it was made ready for transport over to Peerless Studios, in readiness for where the motion control filming was to take place. As the BBC did not have their own motion control camera rig to film the trial ship miniature, this forced Mike Kelt to look outside the corporation for help. Subsequently, he turned to his old colleague Ken Houston of the Peerless Camera Company and struck a favourable deal with him to film the sequence on their premises and using their state-of-the-art equipment for as little as £5,000, which for the time was an incredibly small amount of money. Or in other words, it was done at mate rates. That said, there was an extra incentive at play here. In return for this favour, Peerless would be awarded the contract for filming all of the effect sequences for a brand new BBC science fiction show called Star Cops that was due to go into production just a few months later. Effectively, it was a trade-off on the promise of further work. Because the trial ship miniature was rather ungainly, being approximately 6 foot wide, about the same in height, and riddled with hundreds of fragile and rather prone antennas, transporting it and actually getting it into the studio at Peerless proved a little bit difficult, but ultimately it arrived and was set up accordingly. Peter Tyler was assigned by Peerless to light and photograph the model. He remembers the setup for the shoot as being particularly challenging for a number of reasons. Primarily as the motion control rig itself was incredibly bulky with a mass of thick trailing cables protruding from it, he had to carefully plot and program its course around the model without any part of it crashing into the delicate structure, as any damage to the model would have been utterly disastrous. Also, as Peter always preferred to backlight his subjects for a more cinematic feel, one of the issues that arose from this was that due to the camera rig moving through almost 360 degrees, this meant that his lighting rigs would ultimately become apparent in the shot, and so a subtle shift in their positioning had to be worked in seamlessly to avoid this. After a day was taken to install, set up and light the model, as well as to plot and program the camera movement, 4 further days were taken to film the various passes that, when composited together, would make up the entirety of the sequence. The following day, Tuesday, was the first full day of shooting, and this covered the beauty pass of the station, filmed on Kodak's 5247 colour stock. Later that day, a part of just the space station's practical lights was shot, followed by the tractor beam element. All of Wednesday was spent on capturing the final pass of the space station, backlit for a garbage matte shot on Kodak's high-contrast black and white 5369 film stock. With all the composite shots completed for the trial ship, the model was struck and removed from the studio in readiness for new subject elements to be filmed over the course of the final 2 days. Thursday, the Starfield cyclorama was set up and shot on colour stock, while Friday, the final day, was spent shooting several passes of Mike Tucker's newly built TARDIS model, as well as the visitor pods that were required for a few scenes later in the season. All of these passes were then composited on an Oxbury dual-headed optical printer, to which the resultant negatives were sent off to be processed and printed before being dubbed onto video so that the sequence could be edited into the final show. And that completed this phase of the production. Back in 1985, just as Doctor Who was cancelled, budding composer Dominic Glynn sent producer John Nathan Turner a demo tape in the hopes of being considered for a spot on the show providing incidental music. If successful, this would be his first foray into television work. Despite the cancellation, the tape impressed John enough to keep Dominic's details on file, and so when the show was eventually given its reprieve, Dominic was furnished with a script and was asked to submit a score for the new season's opening model sequence. Although he was not properly set up for this in terms of his preferred equipment, Dominic vowed to push on regardless, as he really did not want to lose out on such an opportunity. Effectively, he found himself to be composing the score completely blind, with his only source of inspiration being Robert Holmes's wonderfully evocative and poetic description of the cathedral-like station's reveal. Reading through the script, Dominic immediately knew that a church organ would be the key sound to his score, and that additionally the mournful tolling of a cloister bell would be the perfect way to open the composition in an ominous and foreboding fashion. The track was gradually tweaked over time, and once Dominic was provided with the final trial ship footage, he was able to adjust the timing of his score to better match what was happening on screen. In fact, producer John Nathan Turner was so pleased with Dominic's efforts that he also offered him the chance to update the show's main theme tune, which he duly accepted. And so, the final piece of this iconic puzzle was added to the footage, thus completing a sequence that would go on to mesmerise and thrill millions of people over the next 4 decades. But what became of the trial ship miniature once it was done with after filming? Well, like many props and models from the show, it found itself put out on display in the long-running Doctor Who exhibition at Longleat House in Wiltshire, where I got to see it for myself in its full glory in the September of 1988. Good Lord, it was simply amazing to see.
Clearing up is continuing today after fire destroyed the BBC Doctor Who exhibition at Longleat House in Wiltshire. Some exhibits from the TV series were badly damaged. Staff are promising to put on a new exhibition as soon as possible.
The exhibition is housed in a listed building in the stable courtyard at Longleat. The fire broke out at about 3:30 yesterday afternoon. The building was immediately evacuated and no one was injured. The cause of the fire is believed to be an electrical fault on a switch operating one of the exhibits.
The exhibition building itself is very, very badly damaged. We managed to hold the fire just within that area, but certainly it's going to take a lot of work to get it back up together again.
There's a lot of smoke damage, but hopefully, with the sort of skill of restorers, we shall be able to get a lot of it back, which will be the original items.
The exhibition has been at Longleat for 23 years. Many of the items destroyed were originals from the Doctor Who series. Claire Banks, BBC News West, Longleat.
And unfortunately, one of the victims of that fire was the trial ship miniature itself. While not completely incinerated by the flames, the extreme heat combined with the pervasive smoke damage managed to melt and destroy almost all of the plastic kit parts that were used for the station's detailing, leaving just the fiberglass shell behind. It was now just a shadow of its former self, completely undisplayable, with all that hard work of the BBC visual effects technicians being lost and gone forever. But there is hope. I happen to have castings of the main fiberglass panels that make up the hull of the ship, and over the last few years I've extensively researched and bought almost all of the kits that were originally used on the BBC's model, so in theory, I could resurrect the trial ship. I've already loaned out one panel casting so that a close approximation could be made for a recent exhibition over in Peterborough, but I'd like to fully remake this miniature using all of the proper kit parts to bring that station back from the dead so that everyone can see and enjoy this fantastic piece of pure artwork once more. Looking at it objectively though, this is going to be a massive undertaking both financially as well as physically, and I may need some help to get all this going, but I think it's a worthwhile project, and if I can get the ball rolling on it, then that would be just sublime and a personal dream come true for me. Let me know down in the comments whether you think this is worth pursuing, or not, as I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the matter. So until next time, stay well, thank you so much for watching, and let's see where this takes us, if anywhere. Bye for now then.